Chapter 3 Antenna and Transmission Lines. It's possible for the sum of the area of the cover of the novice of the egg class with the license exam with the review of the question of the general class life with the review vote for the novice section of the general section with the book over the you take with the general class exam. Play with the question antenna of the transmission line with the question of the novice section of the deal with the electronic magnetic field of the inseparable show for the flow of the electrical for the current motion with the magnetized object. Observe with the electric magnetic field with the alternate swapping with the energy of the current content with the provide with the motion with the current sum of the energy law with the surrounding medium and the loss known as radiation in the Federal Communication Commission. You will be asked to define such term of the radiation resonance with a parasitic excitation antenna input the impedance of the end of the effect of the antenna resonance with the will be after the type of the antenna with the multi-element arrays for the ground antenna with the valve of the antenna with the characteristics include the polarization directivity bandwidth with the effect of the power gain of the Federal Communication Commission question. Transmission lines make cover of the subject with the character of the impedance for the attenuation versus frequency advantages varies the disadvantage of the different type of lines for the radiation losses shows what is the meant with the term radiation resistance. Radiation resistance ratio of the total power square of the effect of the current with the given in the antenna is R equals P. Our radiation resistance is equal to the effect of the value of the antenna of the current field point with a P with the total power radiated and by the antenna over understream of the power of the disposition of the electromagnetic field of the produce of the antenna with the obtainment of the concerning familiar concept of the power of the phasing of the AC circuit such as the present tank share with the AC circuit with the true power of the quote equal to voltage time over the current per multitude with the consign with the phasing with the between them and the ideal tank share with each of the volts that reacts with the component produces a 90 phase shift with the between the current voltage with the sense of the kindle sign with the 90 degrees zero with the power dissipated with a complete cycle with a zero. The antenna may be considered with the tank circuit with the sense of the magnetic field directly proportional with the antenna with the current with maybe the U with the compute power distributed with the induction field of the electronic and magnetic with the fields component with the 90 degrees alpha with the illustrated with the figure 11 13 1 B with the constant with the no power with the dissipate with the induction field with the any with the power to deliver the field during with the one portion of the cycle with the must be returned during and over the portion electronic and magnetic components for the radiation field with the phase with the illustrated with the figure 13 1 with the power therefore dissipate with the power of the radiator with the antenna with the form of the primitive of the radiation with the pattern with the comparable to the power dissipated with the resistance with the practical tank circuit with the resistance dissipated with the same amount with the power of the antenna dissipated with the color of the radiation resistance. The relation with exists between the power dissipated with the antenna the current with the radiation with the resistance with the mathematically defined as noted above. Radiation resistance vary with the antenna with the length as shown in the graph of the figure 13.2 with a half wavelength with the antenna with the radiation resistance measured with the current maximum center with the antenna with the approximately 73 ohms with a quarter wavelength antenna with the radiation resistance measured with the current with the maximum approximately 36.6 ohms. There are free space value with the value of the radiation resistance would exist with the antenna with a completely isolated with the radiation pattern would be an instructed practical antenna installation. However, the antenna the effect of the radiation resistance with the chain of the radiation resistance curve because of the good reflection and the intercept of the antenna the alter of the amount of the antenna with the current flow depending on that phase. Shows the reflected wave of the increase of the amateur current with the decrease of the two wave of the reflective wave of the ride with the antenna into the term of the function of the antenna with the height and orientation. At some of the antenna height with the possible with the reflected wave with the undue with the antenna with the current wave with the transparent with the current with the total antenna with the current increase with the other antenna heights with the two with the currents with about 180 degrees out with the total antenna with the current with the actually less with the no ground reflection occur with the given in power antennas or current with the increase with the effective with the radiation resistance with the decrease of similar with the antenna with the height with the total antenna with the current with the decrease with the radiation resistance is increased. Actual chain with the radiation resistance with the half wave of the length of the antenna with the various heights of the above the ground shown figure 33 and 13.3 radiation resistance horizontal antenna with the receiver with the tail with the maximum is 900 ohm with the height of about 3/8 of the wavelength of the radiation resistance of the falls instead with a 58 ohms height at 5/8 of the wavelength. The resistance of the continue with the rise and fall of the round with the average value of 73 ohms, which is free space of the value with the height is increased with the amount of the variation. Keep it decreasing and shown with the variation radiation resistant. Vertical antenna with a much less of the horizontal mounted antenna with the radiation resistant maximum 100 ohms in the center of antenna with a quarter ohm above the quarter wavelength with a value set with a maximum of the 70 ohms of the height of a half half a wavelength above the ground the value rather than for over the shovel the arms with the average value that's slightly above the free space of the value with a horizontal half wavelength antenna. Since the antenna with the current effect of the antenna height with the field with the intensity produced with the given antenna with the chain with the internal with the radiation resistance produced with the field intensity increase with the even increase with the radiation represent with the resistance produced with the drop of the radiated field with the intensity defined with the term of the parastatic excitation. Beam antenna with the derivative element of the dipole with the usually reference with the simply and with the time with the other elements of the beam and the parasitic element of the composed with the directors of the reflectors with the director issue with the reference with the radiation specifically the direction of the mount with the antenna element with the beam of the transmitting with the end of the tour with the antenna with the element with the beam of the receiving reflecto usually found on the back of the beam reflected radiated energy tour of the antenna element with the tour of the front over the beam of the over the length of the element usually determines over the director over the reflector radiation striking over these element covers with a certain amount of the re-radiation cover the parasitic excitation. Whereas the input impedance with the effect with the magnitude over the voltage current any with the point of half that wave dipole over the antenna with the free space over the impedance at this point with the induction field with the valve with the antenna with the induct with the capacity with the component value with the reaction with the value with the radiation resistance with the value with the current with the antenna with the combination with the reactor with the resistive with the opposition rendered with the sum of the impedance value with the antenna impedance is similar to the characteristic impedance with the transmission it's called with the antenna input with the impedance formula with the maybe with the compute with the value of the input impedance is the input impedance is equal to the voltage over amp. The impedance is equal to the resistance over the J X over the antenna with the resistance represents the specific antenna with every point with its length. With this can be with the comparing voltage current value with the distributed along with the antenna shown in figure 13.4 using Ohm's formula with the impedance. It can also see with the highest impedance with the curve with the current and lowest over the vice versa between the points of the highest lowest impedance antenna impedance value with the file over the curve of the 13.4b with the definement determinant end of the effect insulator connect with the end of the half wave with the antenna with the support with the purpose of the event with the even with the dielectrical affinity with the air with itself with the air with a certain amount with the circumstance capacity antenna system at a capacity result shortening the actual physical length of the antenna refers to the end of the effect with the physical length of the antenna is actual measure for the high length of the antenna the end to end of the physical length within feet half wave antenna given the frequency derived at half of the wavelength in feet with the 300 times 3.28 times 0.92 over the 2 times the frequency equals 468 over the frequency of the formula. After the frequency in megahertz for the number in the first portion equation of the derived in the following 300 the number of million meters per second of the radio wave propagated 3.28 the number of feet in 1 meter 0.95 at the end of the factor formula is sufficient for where antenna frequency up to 300 megahertz however this can be found with the window of the quarter wavelength antennas U with the end of the factor is closer 0.97 with the electric wavelength the region with the different factor with a no insulator U with the square the reason with a different effect with no insulator with a quarter wavelength antenna usually self-supporting. The factor of determining the antenna with the resonant frequency of the antenna determine the physical side of the antenna the elements of the beam type of the system. See with the induction with the capacity with the feed point with the antenna the correct length of the operating frequency, resonant frequency, circle with the presence of the pure resistance with the excitation, circle with the antenna, habit together with the resonant length, so both of the resistance reacting with the excitation, circle with the antenna with the slower longer with the half wave length with the exact with the indicative of the circuit with a slight solution of the looks capacity with the discovery of the directive of the physical character with the parasitic array, stacked array type of the antenna of the parasitic with the multi-element of the array with the concept of the more with the less with the conventional with the dipole with the number with the addition of the path with the dipole with the space with the ordinary critical interval with the U with the beam boom with the bisect with the plane over the derivative element of the dipole with the Yagi the antenna with the picture with the figure 13 with the show with the configuration fairly common form of the area with the term parasitic with the derive of the fact that the only one element of the antenna the actual driven other element is completely passive with the nature of this curve only with the reinforced with a single with the emitting from the arriving of the antenna with the dipole the label the radiator with the drawing with the driven element the reflector solid light of the aluminum rod usually this is slightly longer with the driven element with a place of approximately quarter wavelengths behind it with because of the length of the reflector reflects the largest percentage of the radiation striking it the element is situated with the other side of the driven element with the call of the directive of the air, shore over the drive of the element, sure over the reinforces, signal approaching over the drive of the element, aim with the net gain over the antenna itself of the parasitic array with a highly directive depending on the number of the elements of the spacing between the elements of the length over the directive of the directors all cut with the same size, show the slightly smaller with the driven element of the antenna that have very narrow bandwidth of each of the directive of the progressively small with the one near with the radius of the link with increase substantially with the sacrifice overall gain of course. Stacked array of the array constant existing with at least two elements of the radius of the reflective of the three elements U with the third element to become with the detected with a position on a boom as shown in figure 13.6. Interesting, and two such arrays can be stuck to increase net power gain signal such array of 3 decibels. Practice 2 antennas must be fed with the safety and stuff of the man with the output signal with the safety each of it with the otherwise signal the reinforcement no place and cancellation occur. Similarly stacked array of shown figure 13 of the antenna consist of the 2 dipole with the track with the properly favored range referred to as the lazy H of the cover of the deployed antenna with the resemblance of the later H in the central terminal of each dipole with the connect with the parallel wire shown in each conductor with the transmission attached to the third parallel wire point midway between 2 dipoles and hing with the directive and the directive of the may be the edge with the achieve the even the greater directive of the gain. 2 identical stacked array with the connect with the gap with the stack with the phase of the overall gain and signal array is increase 3 decibel the negative velocity of each time on the effect of the area with the antenna of the array with the double of the addition with another dynamical power gain is increased with 3 decibel. Explain the voltage current relationship between the quarter wave of the ground and antenna. The ground quarter wave of the antenna is known as the macaroni antenna. The difference of the macaroni antenna, the half of the hertz over the half wave of the type of the macaroni on the type. We have the exacting path of the ground and the hertz of the type that does not. With the macaroni antenna, the transmit element shown with the figure 13A with the transmit with the connect with the between the antenna of the ground with the actual length and a quarter over the wavelength over the type of the antenna, the virtual over the connect with the ground, the use of the ground surface at the end of the quarter wavelength member, making the antenna electrically half of the wave of the antenna with a mirror image of the macaroni antenna below of the radiator 13A with this would become the earth is good with the conduct with the reflection that was realized in another quarter wave section when it was viewed with the use of the macaroni antenna the half wave operation with the same voltage current independent with the relation with character for the half wave of the antenna that will also exist for the exit and antenna. The exemption of this input with the impedance of the width of the 36.6 ohm with the impedance of the feed point with the half wave of the antenna with the drawing antenna current shown in the broken line when the curve of the solid the curve of the core represent with the voltage and the herd antenna voltage essentially 0 over the feed point and maximum at the end. Over the maximum of the feed point over the dimension of the almost 0 over the on the value of the voltage current word will take on the infinite number of points for the antenna the value of the word plotted with the graph paper the word form in the portion of sin wave. Briefly describe the polarization received with the transmission antenna. Describe the principal character of the waveform with the electric field with the component with the take with the point with the reference with the example with the intent with the radio wave with the usually mentioned with the internal with the strength with the electric field with the orientation wave space for the desire describe the term of the direction of the wave travel the direction of the electrical field with the electronic magnetic field in space set with the bipolarized with the direction electrical field consider the direction of the polarization electrical field parallel with the axis of the half wave dipole with the antenna with the plane polarization half wave dipole with the horizontally oriented with the radiated wave with the horizontally polarized vertically polarized wave with the radiated with the antenna is erected vertically. The maximum absorption energy with the electronic magnetic field with the necessary with the half wave with the dipole with the located with the plane with the polarization place over the conductor with the right angle with the magnetic lines force of the moving through the antenna parallel with the electrical lines. Alright, this show the dipole antenna fluxity dipole variations. The polarization wave of the vary slightly over the shore of the distance, therefore the transmitter receiving the antenna that orientated like with especially short distance up with them. Over long distance polarization chain with the chain is usually small with a low frequency, high frequency with a chain with a quite with a rapid. Discover the direction of the character of the electronic magnetic propagation of the room of the dipole, the antenna, the relation for the E with the electronic EH magnetic field over the propagative of the radiation field over the air phase of the time with the 90 degree of the phase of the phase of the half of the wave of the antenna, the intensive field of the non-uniform of the 2 points of the length of the which will field the maximum of the other points of the length of the which will field is minimum as shown in figure 13.9. Either the E field shown on the 7 and solid closed loops over the exist of each of the side of the antenna. The H field with the 9 degrees out with the phase shown with a circle. Go over either the crossover the dots with an indicator of the direction, insinuate with the shown on the superimpose with the field with an indicator of the variation electronic flux intensity with the various distance and angle away from the antenna. The direction on the perpendicular with the antenna. The fields over the trunk with a parallel with the direction away from the antenna. This is often the end of the antenna. The fields are weakest if you reach them with a high wave of the antenna that says to be the directional antenna. The because of the current with the greatest for the current. Same with the dipole, the maximum radiation takes place with the F at the point with a practical to no ratio that takes place at the end, but the antenna could isolate with a completely free and speed with the points of the maximum radiation would have been plane perpendicular with the plane antenna that shown with the donut shape, serve with the pattern with the figure 1310A with the horizontal cross with the section pattern shown with figure 1310B because circular field pattern with the creative of the field string within the same with the compass directive with the theoretically vertical dipole with a free space has no vertical radiation along with the directional line axis of the hell with it may produce considerable amount of radiation from the other angle with a measurement on the line of the antenna axis with the figure 1310 with the C with the over the vertical cross section of the radiation part with the 1310A with the radiation line with the OA is due with the end of the angle with the represented AOB with the appreciable radiation greater than the angle AOC the radiation with the greater angle with the because of the variation field strength with the pattern with a different angle with the field strength with the pattern with the vertical halfway with the antenna with the take with the horizontal plane with a specific vertical with the radiation with the pattern implies. Figure 13D is over the half of the donut pattern with the horizontal half wave of the dipole with the maximum radiation takes place with the plane with a perpendicular axis with the antenna that crosses through the same of the variation radiation field with the intensity of the antenna that can be graphically with a polar diagram. Figure 1311 of zero distance. Assume center of the chart with the indicating center of the antenna the circle prone with the tangent of the circle with the laid off the angular degree computed. Measure value with the field strength with the may be plotted with the radially with the manner with the show with the both of magnitude for the direction with the give it the distance of the antenna with the field strength. Vertical plane plotted semicircular polar chart with a knot with the shown in the figure with the referred to vertical polar diagrams. Discover the bandwidth of the characteristics of the antenna system. There are three factors of the importance in the discussion on the frequency range of the bandwidth of the antenna system. These have the front-back ratio of the gaining with the standing wave of the ratio of the amateur radio of the antenna shown with the must be capable of operating over the range of the frequency with a specified bandwidth. The bandwidth of the characteristics become the sum of the concern. Front-to-back ratio is usually expressed in the decibel over the ratio of the between the level of the power of the radio radiated from the front over the maximum of the direction antenna the level of the power of the back with 180 degrees maximum of the direction front back to the ratio of the might vary with the frequency being transmitted or received varying depending on the design type of the antenna system. Again, characteristic of the antenna the design with the gate provided with a large gain with the bandwidth of the antenna will be effectively rule of thumb. The higher the gain, more selective the antenna will be within the area of the operating bandwidth. Seeing with ratio with the different operating with the frequency with the opposite with the effect with the operating bandwidth with the antenna the same wave with the ratio with the U with the discover the long transition lines with the standing wave ratio with the exist with the impedance with the transmit with the antenna the bowl for the end of the line with the mismatch with the result of the decrease of the power being transmitted to the receiver with the particular antenna system frequency with a single with the termination cover the antenna the well with the transmission line link with the antenna with the calculated sum of the portion wave with the frequency of the quarter wave with the half wave with the full wave etc. Same usually over the true with the transmission line, some of the type of the impedance with the matching with the device, if it's not used, therefore with the frequency varying with the medium with the circle limited to standing wave ratio, will increase with the causing of the impedance with the mismatch with the loss of the free efficiency. Those are the bandwidth characteristics of the antenna system with the effect of the same wave with the ratio. It's been determined the power beam with the restrict the antenna of the transmission with the receptors and core with the impulse of the antenna with the radio with the more power with the transmitter provided with the half of the when the antenna is used. Such a meaning with the concrete with a large portion of the energy with the antenna with the restricted beam of the antenna with the half of the gain of the power beam of the antenna portion of the radiation pattern of which most of the transmitted energy with the concentrate with the power beam with the direction of the antenna with the power with the beam width is relevant to the degree of the beam with determined with the measuring field strength of the center of the beam with the reference of the field strength of the diminished of the receiver of the antenna with the move laterally from the center of the beam with the number of the circular degrees between the half power with the power constant with the antenna with the band with the dipole radiation pattern with the bioelectrical directional with the mount with the horizontal with the antenna with the receiver the coordinate with the place with the same with the set for the antenna with the opposite 0 decimals reference point with the center with the dipole with the maximum radiation field with the gain of any with the beam type of the antenna with the determined measuring with the field strength and with the receiver the operating with the strength of the over the strength of the field with the radio with the dipole antenna with the receiver the show with the the encrypt with the 3 decibel with the beam antenna with the U with the transmit with the effective with the radiated power with the transmitting antenna side with the have with the double the 3 decibel gain shift with the input side with the only equivalent with the transmitting antenna power beam with the field strength with any over the point with the radiation pattern with the diminishing with the more with the amount with the required with the produce with the gain and power beam, which is the main characteristic independent of the share of the independent transmission line with the physical character of the proportional of the transmission line considered for the two parallel conductors spaced for the specific distance from each of their two leads carry over the current over the course of the property with the inductance for the center of the two wire with the space for the conductor with the also the pose of the property with the capacity with the sum of the material each conductor may be the specific conductor with the transmission line position for the property specific the value of the property determined with the characteristic impedance transmission line infinite length with the consider with the infinite number of the capacity with the inductor with the voltage with the ply with the input terminal with the line current would begin to flow with the continue with the flow of the line as the capacity with the inductor with we're able to absorb the electrical energy since there would be an infinite number of the section of each of the having with the property with the equivalent circle with the figure 13 for the current would be the flow and identify with the identifying lane where a uniform and impedance with the any with the section of the line with the seam of the impedance for the opposite of the circle with the any with the portion of the line with the same length unit length current would be similar over the finite value with the current with the theoretical line with the voltage applied with the weird known with the impedance of the line could be determined the application of the Ohm law with the value is fitted to with the characteristic surge impedance of the impractical for the impedance for the two wire line proportional to the space between the wires actually with the function of the diametrical diametrical of the wires electrical dielectrical material of the separating of the two wires over the conductive wires over the some fairly easy with the estimate of the characteristic impedance simply observing the lines of the greater of the separation of the between the conductive the higher of the impedance the diameter increase of the spacing must be increased with the proportional to maintain the same with the impedance values the effect of the increasing of the space with the two wires with the increase of the characteristics compared with the inductor capacity of the ratio of the increase of the similar reduction of the two diameter with the wires also with increased characteristic impedance of the reduction of the side of the wire effect with the capacity with the more of the inductance for the effect of the equivalent to the increase of the side of the plate with the capacity with in order to decrease the capacity with the any chain with the dielectrical with the material with between the two wires with also chain with the characteristic impedance chain with the dielectrical increase the capacity with the between the wire with the characteristic impedance of the reduced characteristic impedance of the two-wire line with the dielectrical may be obtained with the formula impedance of the equal to 270 over the logarithm of 2d over the d diameter d capital D is basically the wire with the center and center with the d with the diameter 1 with the conductor with the characteristic impedance with the co-central coaxial line with the dielectrical with the variance from the inductor capacity with the have with the because of the difference of the constrict with the two line with the conductor with the capacitor vary in slightly different meaning of the formula may be used to determine the characteristic impedance of the coaxial with the impedance log. The impedance is equal to 138 of the log over the space between the center of the wires and its diameter of one of the conductors. D is the inner diameter of the outer conductor, and D is the minor d is the outer diameter of the inner conductor. Vectors affect the attenuation of the transmission line with the center amount of the attention of the attenuation that exists with the transmission line factor will have an effect with the transmission line attenuation or of the radio frequency with the diameter of the inner surface of the outer of the coaxial with the conductor with the diametric central conductor with the dielectrical constant relative to the air power factor with the dielectrical with the radio frequency. For electrical coaxial cable will also make you with the amortization of the insulation when we see with the exemption with the frequency of above with the fixed factor with the fixed frequency with the cause of tension with the signal, for example, the 100 feet with the RGB with the 58A with the AV with the coaxial cable with the cover the attenuation 0.8 decibel to 80 meters with 1.2 decibels with 40 meters 1.7 decibels at 20 meters and 2.6 at 10 meters. Attenuation of the RGB AV coaxial cable sometimes less than 0.37 decibel with 80 meters or 0.51 decibels at 40 meters, 7.8 diameter with the 20 meter with 1.1 decibel at the 10 meters. Discover the four of the most common type of the transmission line with the amateur riveting along with the disadvantage each type. The four most common type of the amateur radio transmission line with the pair with the twisted pair with the share with the pair with the concentric with the coaxial line with the rigid and flexible with the U for the particular line with the dependent with the among with other things and applied frequency to with the power handling capability with the type of the insulation two-wire line with the type of the pair with the line with the two-wire operation shown with the gear 13 line with the two wires over the generally spaced for the 2 to 6 inch apart sometimes due with the transmission between the antenna with the transmitter antenna review the range of the type of the line with the construct with the potential the range of the type of the line with the have of the radiation loss is noise pick up with the due with the lack of shield with the radiation loss of the produce of the chain of the field with the produce of the chain of the current with each of the conductor the chum of the lines of the force radiate with the transmission of the much of the chain of the man with the energy with the radiate with the sun with another type of the parallel line with the twin lead with the two ribbons with the type line is illustration of the figure 13/4 in the line is the center of the chain with the two wire open line with the except of the uniform spacing of the shirt with the embedded with the two wires of low loss electrically useless. Alright, polyethylene, some of the wires embedded with a thin ribbon with the polyethylene with the electrical strip of the partially air and partially polyethylene. Twisted pair. The twisted pair transmission illustrated with the name of the twist of the two insulated with the twisted form of the flexible line without the use of the spacers. Able to note you with the frequency with the do the high loss of the curve of the rubber transmission with the line is wet with the loss of the increase greatly. Shield of the pair with the shield of the pair. Show figure 13 chip with the consider with the pair while the conduct with the separator with each other with the surround with the solid electrical with the conduct with the contain with within. Copper braid with the tubing you act with the shield with the assembly is covered with the rubber flexible composition coating with the coating to protect the line. Moisture with the mechanical damage outward or looks alike with the power core with the washing machine with the refrigerator with the principal living with the shield pair with the conduct with the balance with the ground that it is with the capacity between the cable the uniform with the throughout with the length of the line with the balance with the two with the ground shield with the surrounding with the conductors with the uniform spacing over the entire length of the copper braid with the shield with the isolate with the conductor with the tray with the magnetic fields. Coaxial lines are two types of the coaxial line with the rigid air coaxial line with a flexible solid with coaxial line with a physical constrict with the both type with the basically the same with each of the containment of the two concentric conduct with the rigid axis with the air at coaxial line with the wire mounted to the inside coaxial tubular outer conductor line shown in some application for the inner with the conduct with the just with the inner conduct with the inside with the or conduct with the insulation space for the beams with the head with the regular interval with the space for the out found with the Pyrex, polyester, and some of the other material of the process with the good isolation of the character with the low loft, with the high frequency, achieve the advantage of the type with its ability to minimize with the radiation law, with the electrical, with the magnetic field, with the off with the two out with the parallel line, with the infinite rate, with the relative, with the gradient, with the distance, with the radiation and loss of the curve, no electric magnetic field, with the stem, with the outside, with the outer, with the conductor, the coaxial line, with the field, with the confined, with the space between the two conductors, the coaxial line, with a perfectly shaped shield with the line noise, pick up other lines of the prevented lines with the several of the disadvantages as extensive with continuous construct CC construct, which kept the name of the drive with the prevent with excessively leakage with the two conduct with although the high frequency with the loss with the someone less previously mentioned line with the shield excessive enough to limited with a particular length of the line. Condensation moisture with the prevent some application with the inert gas with the nitrogen and helium and argon pump with the line with the pressure with the 3 to 35 pound square inch with the inert gas with the drive of the line with the first install with the pressure with the maintain with the inch with the moisture with the inch of the line. Concentric cable that also with the made inner conductor with the consisting of a flexible wire insulated with the outer conductor wire with a solid usually insulating material with the flexibility maybe to gain the outer conductor made with a metal braid. 1352 with which cover the radiation with the transmission line held with the made with the loft with the produce with the electrostatic with the electromagnetic field with the surround with the conductor with the loft with the transmission line with the action electrostatic field with the charging of the neighbors or object with the wheel chain with the magnetic field with the electromagnetic force the nearby conductor with the either with the case with the energy loss radiation with the induction and the loss with the made with the greatly reduce with the terminating with the line with the resistive with the low of the equal line character with the impediment with the proper shielding of the line. Proper shielding can be accomplished with the coaxial line with the out with the conduct with the ground with the 16. What is meant by the standing wave of the planing of the shaving wave of the ratio of the dating wave of the minimize of the chain wave, the difficult to explain with the because of the involved with the concept that cannot be observed with the theory with the be simplified however the applying with a fairly simply analogy. Supply with the example of the radio wave of the visual the under certain conditional elimination has the appearance of the sim wave of the superimposed on with the full wave of the antenna. Suppose also with the could show with the special illumination so with the radio with the dispatch of the frequency with the signal being generated. Then when the strobe light was aimed with the eye, with the antenna, with the ability of seeing the waves of the property from the antenna. Ability under this condition, the antenna would being fed with a continuously signal that would be appeared with the full side with the same wave with the superimposed but it did not move. It is such a situation with the equivalent to having a standing wave ratio with a 1 to 1, which means with the wave is propagated in space, every wave with the fed into the antenna. If it under the condition of a hypothetical observation of the wave does not stand unless if the situation would be indicated if the antenna were shaped along with, for example, if there were a mismatch between the antenna and the transmission line with the wave would not develop the cup of the breadth of the antenna before the new waves try to enter the antenna. As a consequence of the part of the signal of the lower amplitude of the amplitude signal will be reflected with the back of the toward the transmitter with the mismatch situation when the reflected signal travels back down the line at the same time when the other waves of the antenna bound with the generator end of the transmitter with the another reflection takes place with the other reduces the amplitude signal dissipated with the curve of the antenna tank circle with the antenna matching with the network with a small portion of the reflection and reflected back up the line but out of the step of the phase of the original signal with the process of the repeated with the each of the wave of the transmission line reflected components curve as the cancel interfere with the original applied signal the peak of efficiency with the no reflected signal over the wave of the radio with the space with the precisely with the same time with the new wave that develops across the antenna. All wave diagrams in 1319 show the relation that exists between the incident of the plab of the reflected wave of the transmission line with the terminated with the open circuit with the termination of that resisted the line characteristic compared with the rev of the transmission line with the disconnected from the antenna with the dark line with the superimposed with the waveform representing standing wave with the tanning wave with the instantaneous to sum of the both of the incident with the reflected waves that's open to the transmission with the relation between the incident and the reflected wave shows they are equal in the amplitude of the phase of the receiving end of the phase relation for the figure with the may appear with the confusing, but it must be remembered that incident wave of the move of the right with the reflective of the move to the left of each of the diagrams show the instantaneous sum of the standing with the wave is plotted as using the heavy dark line of diagrams 2 and 6 with the waveform concile with it at the point of the time the voltage zero diagrams can examine the further they were found with the point of the 1/4 with the distance the end of the point with the 3/4 with the distance of the same end of voltage zero at all times recover the zero of the stationary point with the wave with the appropriate with the standing waves. In an AC meter with the use of the current measurement of the taking on the line with the current readings of the wood only with the magnitude with the not polarity with the value with the found with the plot with the graph of the current curve period for the plot with the going waves with the illustrated in the figure 1320 with the conventional picture of the standing waves. And at the end of the transmission line with the terminated opening with the current with the zero with the mouth to maximum with the terminating end. Relationships may be divided in phase with the voltage with the current with the end of the opening end with the transmission with the 90 out of phase with the end of the end transmit with the terminated with the short current maximum voltage zero with the voltage current with again with the 90 degrees out with the phase with the current voltage relation with the shown on the diagram of these phases the relation with are important because they indicate how the line with the different with the point along with the length. Transmission line will have the points of the maximum the minimum voltage as well with the point of the minimum and maximum current with the point of the least point with the accurately predicted applied frequency type of the line with the termination are known. Chapter 14 Radio Communication Practices.